If there's one thing a narcissist cannot stand, it's being ignored. To someone else, the loss of attention might be a mild irritation and inconvenience at most. But for a narcissist, it cuts much deeper. You have to understand that their entire psychological structure is built on a fragile foundation of external validation. Without a steady supply of attention, what psychologists call narcissistic supply, the carefully crafted image they present to the world begins to unravel. And when that image crumbles, what's left underneath is a profound emptiness they are desperate to avoid facing. This dependency on external affirmation is not a superficial quirk. It is a fundamental part of how a narcissist maintains their sense of self. In a very real way, their identity doesn't exist in the internal world. It's mirrored back to them by others. This means that when you withdraw your attention, you're not just hurting their feelings, you are threatening their very sense of being. It's a wound far deeper than any verbal retaliation could inflict, and it sends them into a state of profound inner turmoil. What makes this especially powerful is that it's the one thing they cannot control. A narcissist will use every tool at their disposal to manipulate you: guilt, charm, intimidation. But none of those work if you simply refuse to engage. And that refusal, that act of indifference, does something devastating to their psyche. It renders them irrelevant. Imagine spending your entire life constructing a false image, something grandiose, impressive, and carefully maintained, only to have it met with indifference. It's unbearable. And here's why that hurts them so profoundly. Narcissists believe they must be the center of attention to matter. If you're not reacting, if you're not feeding their ego, then in their mind, they are nothing. They don't experience the world in the same way you do. For most people, identity is rooted in something intrinsic: your values, your character, the relationships you build. But for the narcissist, identity is entirely externalized. It depends on what others reflect back to them. When you deprive them of that reflection, you force them into an identity crisis. They panic. They scramble to regain control. And if they can't, the mask begins to slip, revealing the insecurity and shame they work so hard to bury. Now, this withdrawal of attention isn't simply about ignoring their phone calls or refusing to engage in arguments. It's much deeper than that. It's an internal shift, a decision to no longer allow their behavior to dictate your emotional state. Narcissists are masters at creating emotional chaos because it keeps you focused on them. If you're constantly defending yourself, explaining yourself, or trying to win their approval, you remain trapped in their game. But the moment you decide not to play, that's when you take your power back. And here's the part they truly cannot stand. When you withdraw your attention, you rob them of the ability to define reality for you. Narcissists manipulate through a distortion of truth. They gaslight, they twist narratives, and they make you question your own perceptions. But once you step back, once you refuse to engage, their ability to shape your world falls apart, and nothing frightens them more than losing that power. You might wonder, why does this tactic work so effectively? It's because it strikes at the heart of their deepest fear: being invisible. Despite the grandiosity they project, most narcissists carry an underlying sense of worthlessness. This is what fuels their constant need for admiration. It's a never-ending attempt to outrun that internal void. When you stop feeding that need, you force them to confront the emptiness they've been avoiding their entire lives, and they will do almost anything to avoid that confrontation. In many cases, the narcissist will escalate their behavior when they sense you withdrawing. This isn't because they care about you in any genuine way, it's because they can't stand to lose control. You might see them become more aggressive, more charming, or more desperate to pull you back in. This is not a sign of their strength, it is a sign of their weakness. Their panic reveals how much they relied on you to stabilize their fragile identity. And when you refuse to be that stabilizing force, their psychological house of cards starts to collapse. But here's the crucial part. You must remain firm. The moment you re-engage, you hand that power back to them. Narcissists are experts at exploiting emotional openings. If they sense that you still care, if they see even a glimmer of emotional investment, they will use it to reassert control. True freedom comes from an unwavering commitment to your own reality, a refusal to let their manipulations pull you back into their world. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this: by withdrawing your attention, you reclaim your autonomy. You step out of the role they assigned you, the admirer, the scapegoat, the emotional caretaker, and you become the author of your own life. The narcissist may panic, but that panic is not your problem. Your focus must remain on your own growth, your own values, and your own sense of reality. Because in the end, the most effective way to torture a narcissist is not through revenge, not through anger, but through your indifference, when you no longer need them, when their opinions, their manipulations, and their judgments lose their hold over you. That's when their power truly shatters. And that's when you are finally free. If there is one thing a narcissist cannot tolerate, it's the loss of control. Control to them is not just a preference, it's a necessity. It's the mechanism through which they construct a predictable reality, one where their fragile self-image remains intact. Without control, they are left to face the chaotic and disordered truth of their own internal world, a truth they will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid. So when you establish firm boundaries, you strike at the core of their psychological survival. It's not merely an inconvenience for them, it's a threat. Boundaries represent something intolerable to the narcissist. Autonomy. Autonomy implies that you are not an extension of their will, not a piece on the chessboard they can manipulate at their convenience. It signals that you have your own thoughts, your own values, and your own capacity to make decisions independent of their influence. This is anathema to their worldview because a narcissist fundamentally believes that other people exist to serve their needs. When you disrupt that belief, when you make it clear that you are not theirs to control, you shatter the illusion of their dominance. But why does this affect them so profoundly? It comes down to the way narcissists regulate their emotional world. Most people, when confronted with emotional pain, engage in reflection. They ask themselves questions. What am I feeling? Why am I reacting this way? What does this pain mean, and how can I address it? This process, though difficult, is essential for psychological growth. But narcissists do not, or perhaps cannot, engage in this form of self-examination. To do so would require confronting a truth they find unbearable, that beneath the grandiosity lies a profound sense of inadequacy. Instead of facing that truth, they externalize their emotional turmoil. Their pain becomes someone else's problem. Their insecurity must be soothed by the obedience of others, and the most effective way they maintain this system is through control. When you set a boundary, you refuse to participate in that system. You say, I am responsible for myself, and you are responsible for yourself. This creates a profound disruption in their psychological equilibrium. Suddenly, they can no longer offload their internal chaos onto you. And without that external outlet, they are left alone with their own disordered psyche. This is why you often see narcissists react with such explosive fury or manipulative charm when faced with a firm boundary. It's not because the boundary itself is offensive. It's because the boundary threatens the entire framework through which they maintain emotional stability. You may notice a predictable pattern when you begin to enforce boundaries. At first, the narcissist may test them subtly, probing for weaknesses. If that fails, they often escalate, employing guilt, manipulation, or even outright aggression to wear you down. But the deeper psychological truth is this: their desperation reveals their dependence. For all their posturing of superiority, their power relies entirely on your willingness to comply. The moment you refuse to play their game, the facade begins to crack. And here is the key. Your boundaries must not be negotiable. Narcissists thrive in ambiguity. If your limits are vague, inconsistent, or easily bypassed, they will find a way to exploit them. Clear, firm, and non-negotiable boundaries are the only language they understand. And when you hold those boundaries, when you refuse to explain, justify, or waver, you deliver a profound message. I will not be controlled. But there is a deeper, more profound impact here, one that reaches beyond your relationship with the narcissist. Every time you assert a boundary, you reclaim a part of yourself that may have been lost in the chaos of their manipulation. You begin to redefine who you are on your own terms. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotional energy, once consumed by their drama, is redirected toward your own growth. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to trust yourself again, because the truth is many people in relationships with narcissists lose that trust. After being gaslit, criticized, and undermined for so long, you begin to doubt your own reality. Boundaries restore that trust. Each one is a statement of self-respect, a declaration that your needs, your values, and your experiences matter. Now, some people fear that setting boundaries will provoke the narcissist into greater retaliation, and in some cases, that fear is justified. When their control slips away, many narcissists will escalate their manipulative tactics in an attempt to pull you back under their influence. But here's the crucial point. Their escalation is not a sign of your weakness. It is evidence of your strength. The more they react, the clearer it becomes how much they relied on your submission. And as uncomfortable as that may be in the short term, it is also a powerful confirmation that you are breaking free from their grip. It's important to understand that boundaries are not about controlling the narcissist's behavior. That's a losing game. Boundaries are about defining what you will and will not tolerate. You cannot change their character, but you can absolutely change the space you allow them to occupy in your life. This is where your true power lies. You are no longer waiting for them to respect you or hoping they will change. Instead, you take responsibility for protecting your own well-being, and that is a power they cannot take from you. In the end, the greatest act of defiance against a narcissist is not rage, not revenge. It is simply refusing to be controlled. When you hold firm boundaries, you disrupt their entire mechanism of manipulation. You force them to face the truth they've spent a lifetime avoiding, that they are not omnipotent, that their power is an illusion, and that without your compliance, they are fundamentally powerless. And here's the most important truth to hold on to. You are not responsible for their feelings, their insecurities, or their need for control. You are responsible for yourself. And when you fully embrace that responsibility, you reclaim the freedom that is rightfully yours. Narcissists thrive on attention. It's their lifeblood, their currency, and their primary means of maintaining a fragile and deeply unstable sense of self. In psychological terms, this is called narcissistic supply. The admiration, validation, or even fear they extract from those around them. Without it, they are left exposed to the very feelings they work so tirelessly to suppress. Feelings of emptiness, inadequacy, and insignificance. This is precisely why indifference is so devastating to them. It's not just that they dislike being ignored, it's that your indifference punctures the carefully constructed illusion they've created about themselves and their importance. When you no longer react, when their words no longer evoke an emotional response, you disrupt their entire psychological framework. Narcissists rely on their ability to provoke. Whether it's positive or negative, your reaction confirms that they still hold sway over your emotional world. If they can make you angry, they still have control. If they can make you apologize, they remain superior. If they can make you doubt yourself, they preserve their dominance. But when you become indifferent, when you refuse to engage, their power begins to unravel. It's as if you've pulled the rug out from under them and the world they've so meticulously shaped around themselves begins to crumble. What makes indifference particularly excruciating for a narcissist is that it mirrors back the one thing they fear most, their own irrelevance. At their core, many narcissists are haunted by a profound sense that they do not truly matter, that without external validation, they are nothing. This fear is so intolerable that they will manipulate, deceive, and even destroy relationships to avoid confronting it. Your indifference, then, is not just a withdrawal of attention, it is a direct challenge to the belief that they are the central figure in your life. And that is a truth they are utterly unequipped to handle. Of course, achieving indifference is easier said than done. When you've been enmeshed with a narcissist, your emotional responses have often been shaped by their behavior. They provoke, you react. It's a deeply ingrained pattern. And breaking that pattern requires not just willpower, but a fundamental shift in how you view yourself and your worth. You must come to see that your emotional energy is valuable, and wasting it on someone who only seeks to manipulate you is a form of self-betrayal. This is not about suppressing your feelings. It's about reclaiming your right to decide where those feelings are directed. Indifference does not mean you stop caring about your own dignity or well-being. Quite the opposite. It means you stop granting the narcissist the power to dictate your emotional state. When they insult you, it is no longer a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their insecurity. When they attempt to guilt trip you, it reveals their fear of losing control, not your failure. And when they try to pull you back into the chaos, you can recognize it for what it is, an attempt to reassert the dominance they can feel slipping away. There is a profound freedom in reaching the point where their words and actions no longer affect you. And make no mistake, it is a point you can reach. It's a process that requires patience and self-compassion. It means allowing yourself to grieve the hopes you may have had for a different kind of relationship. It means recognizing that you cannot change who they are, no matter how much you invest. And it means redirecting your energy toward your own growth rather than being consumed by their dysfunction. One of the most remarkable things you'll notice when you cultivate indifference is how predictable their behavior becomes. Narcissists often believe they are uniquely intelligent or cunning, but their emotional patterns are astonishingly repetitive. They will cycle through the same tactics: provocation, guilt, manipulation, because those are the only tools they know. When those tactics no longer work, they often become desperate, scrambling to find a new way to pull you back into their sphere. And that desperation reveals just how dependent they have been on your emotional investment. But here is the crucial part: their reaction is not your responsibility. One of the great psychological traps when dealing with a narcissist is the belief that you are somehow obligated to manage their feelings. This is not true. You are not responsible for their insecurity. You are not responsible for their rage. And you are certainly not responsible for maintaining the illusion that they are more important than they are. Your only responsibility is to protect your own mental and emotional health. When you master the art of indifference, you are no longer trapped in their emotional labyrinth. You stop playing a game you cannot win, and more than that, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were lost in their shadow. Your energy becomes your own again. Your thoughts are no longer consumed by how to navigate their next outburst. You become free in the most profound sense, not just free from them, but free to live your life according to your own values. And the irony, of course, is that this freedom is precisely what tortures a narcissist the most, because nothing wounds their fragile ego more deeply than realizing they no longer have a hold over you. When you no longer need their approval, their ability to control you evaporates. And in that moment, the narcissist is forced to confront the truth they've been avoiding their entire lives, that without the power to manipulate others, they are left with nothing but themselves. So, if you want to shatter their hold over you, begin by withdrawing your emotional investment. Let their words fall flat. Let their provocations echo into silence. Refuse to be drawn back into the chaos they create. And in doing so, you reclaim the one thing they can never take from you, your autonomy. Because in the end, the most powerful statement you can make to a narcissist is simply this: I am no longer yours to control. Narcissists thrive on chaos. It is their natural habitat, the arena where they feel most at home. This is not accidental. It is a deliberate strategy. Chaos keeps you destabilized, uncertain, and emotionally reactive, which is precisely the state in which they can exert the most control. When your mental and emotional energy is consumed by the turmoil they create, you have little left to question their behavior or assert your own boundaries. This is why bringing clarity, crystal clarity, into your interactions with a narcissist is such a powerful and disruptive move. Cuts through the fog of manipulation and forces them to confront a reality they cannot twist to their advantage. Clarity is not simply about what you say, it is about what you refuse to tolerate. Narcissists excel at blurring lines. They rewrite history to suit their narrative, twist your words to make you doubt yourself, and inject confusion into even the most straightforward situations. When you bring clarity, you refuse to play along with these distortions. You stop arguing over their version of reality, a version that is, by design, ever-shifting and self-serving. Instead, you hold firm to what you know to be true. And here's what's fascinating. Narcissists cannot stand being confronted with unyielding truth. It's like holding a mirror up to them that reflects the one thing they cannot face, their own dishonesty. When you establish clarity, you stop engaging with the noise and focus only on what is real. This means communicating with precision and without emotional excess. Narcissists feed on your emotional responses, whether it's anger, confusion, or guilt. When you respond with calm, factual clarity, you deny them that nourishment. You strip away the power they derive from your distress. For instance, if they attempt to gaslight you, twisting events to make you question your memory, you do not argue or defend yourself endlessly. You simply state the truth once, firmly, and move on. That's not what happened, and I'm not going to debate it with you. This level of clarity is not only disarming, it is profoundly unsettling for someone who relies on controlling the narrative. Another aspect of clarity lies in defining and enforcing your boundaries. Narcissists are boundary violators by nature. They push against your limits, not just to see how far they can go, but to undermine your sense of autonomy. Every time you bend or yield, they interpret it as evidence that they hold the reins. Clarity in your boundaries means being unequivocal about what you will and will not accept. It is not about convincing them to respect you. They won't. It is about making it clear that you respect yourself enough to enforce consequences. And this is crucial. Clarity without enforcement is meaningless. If you say, I won't tolerate being disrespected, but allow their insults to go unchecked, your words lose all power. But if you calmly state your boundary and then follow through, whether by leaving the conversation or ending the relationship, you send a message they cannot ignore. The beauty of clarity is that it strips away the narcissist's ability to muddy the waters. They will attempt to bait you with confusion, emotional appeals, or dramatic outbursts. But if you remain anchored in clarity, their tactics lose effectiveness. This doesn't mean they will stop trying, quite the opposite. In fact, the clearer you become, the more frantic their attempts to destabilize you may become. Why? Because your clarity threatens the very foundation of their control. It forces them to recognize that their manipulations no longer work on you, and nothing terrifies them more. This is where psychological depth comes into play. The reason clarity is so painful for a narcissist is that it strips away their ability to avoid reality. Narcissistic behavior is fundamentally rooted in avoidance, a relentless effort to escape feelings of inadequacy and shame. When you bring clarity, you pierce the illusion they've constructed around themselves. You refuse to be pulled into their game, and in doing so, you expose the emptiness at its core. And they know, consciously or not, that without the ability to control you through confusion, they lose the one thing they cannot bear to lose: relevance. What's remarkable about clarity is that it is a tool entirely within your control. You do not need their permission to be clear. You do not need their validation to assert your truth. You simply decide that you will no longer engage in the emotional tug-of-war they rely upon. This decision is transformative, not only in your relationship with the narcissist, but in how you view yourself. Because when you prioritize clarity, you are making a profound statement about your own worth. You are saying, I will no longer live in a reality defined by someone else's dysfunction. And here's the final point. Clarity is an ongoing practice. Narcissists will test it. They will look for cracks. But the more you commit to it, the stronger it becomes. You will begin to see their tactics for what they are: desperate attempts to hold on to power they no longer possess. And the more they sense that they cannot shake your clarity, the more powerless they become. Eventually, they face a truth they cannot manipulate. Their hold over you is broken. So if you want to dismantle a narcissist's power, start by bringing clarity into every interaction. Speak the truth without apology. Set boundaries without wavering. And most importantly, refuse to be drawn back into the confusion they create. Because when you become clear, truly clear, their ability to control you dissolves. And in that clarity, you find something they can never take from you: freedom. Narcissists operate in a world built on appearances, an elaborate facade carefully constructed to hide the profound insecurities at their core. They are masters of creating illusions about themselves, about their relationships, and about their power. But here's a truth they cannot escape. Reality is stronger than any illusion, and nothing is more devastating to a narcissist than being exposed to the truth, especially when that truth undermines the false image they work so tirelessly to maintain. If you want to dismantle their power, there may be no more effective weapon than revealing reality calmly and without apology. At the heart of a narcissist's psychological makeup is a fragile and often deeply wounded sense of self. This is important to understand. Beneath the arrogance and manipulation lies a profound vulnerability. They compensate for this vulnerability by projecting an image of superiority, invincibility, and control. But this image is paper thin. It relies entirely on external validation, on convincing others to buy into the narrative they are selling. And when you refuse to participate in that narrative, when you speak the truth plainly and consistently, you expose the gap between their public image and their private reality. This exposure is not just uncomfortable for a narcissist, it is intolerable. One of the most direct ways to achieve this is through unflinching honesty. Narcissists thrive in environments where truth is malleable, where facts can be twisted, memories rewritten, and perceptions manipulated. But truth, real truth, is not negotiable. When you make a commitment to speaking truthfully, you deprive them of the ambiguity they need to maintain control. And here's the key. You do not need to be aggressive or confrontational to expose reality. In fact, the more composed and factual you are, the more destabilizing it is for them. A simple, calm statement like, "I know what happened and I won't be gaslit into doubting it," carries enormous power. It signals that you are no longer available to be manipulated. But the truth is not just in your words, it is also in your actions. Narcissists are adept at using words as weapons, but actions are much harder to distort. When your behavior reflects your truth, it becomes undeniable. If you say you will no longer tolerate disrespect and you walk away when it happens, you expose their powerlessness over you. When you stop engaging in their emotional chaos and live according to your own values, you make it clear that their influence is no longer shaping your life. This is reality in action, and it is one of the most powerful ways to dismantle their illusions. What makes reality so painful for a narcissist is that it forces them to confront themselves. Their entire psychological defense system is designed to avoid self-examination. They project blame onto others, rewrite history to avoid accountability, and construct elaborate justifications for their behavior. But when you stop playing along, when you calmly and consistently reflect reality back to them, you force them into a position where these defenses begin to crack. They are left with no choice but to see the truth they are desperate to avoid, that their power is dependent on deception, and that without that deception, they are profoundly vulnerable. It's important to recognize that this process will not be welcomed. Narcissists will react to the exposure of reality with defensiveness, rage, or attempts to discredit you. This is predictable because in their worldview, admitting fault or accepting truth is akin to annihilation. They cannot afford to acknowledge reality because doing so threatens the very identity they have constructed. But your task is not to convince them or to win their approval. Your task is simply to remain rooted in what is true, no matter how much they attempt to distort it. This commitment to truth is not just about dismantling their power, it is also about reclaiming your own. Living in the shadow of a narcissist requires a kind of self-betrayal. You are asked, subtly or overtly, to doubt your perceptions, suppress your feelings, and accept a version of reality that serves their needs while erasing your own. When you choose instead to live by the truth, you reverse this dynamic. You affirm that your experiences matter, your feelings matter, your reality matters, and no amount of manipulation can erase that. And here's a profound insight. When you commit to living in truth, you become untouchable to a narcissist. They cannot manipulate what they cannot distort. They cannot control someone who refuses to play the game. And the more clearly and consistently you reflect reality, the more powerless they become. Their illusions shatter, not because you attack them, but because truth, by its very nature, dismantles deception. This clarity of truth extends beyond the relationship itself. When you stop living in a distorted reality, your vision of yourself becomes clearer. You begin to trust your instincts again. You recognize the ways you were diminished or manipulated, and you refuse to allow it any longer. This is not just freedom from the narcissist. It is freedom to be fully yourself, unencumbered by their illusions. So if you want to dismantle a narcissist's power, start with the truth. Speak it clearly, act on it consistently, and refuse to be drawn into their distortions. Because in the end, no matter how elaborate their deceptions may be, reality always wins. And when you stand firmly in the truth, you become a force they cannot control. And that, more than anything else, is what shatters their power. The ultimate blow to a narcissist's power is not rage, revenge, or even confrontation. It is indifference. Indifference communicates in the most profound way possible that their influence over you is gone. For a narcissist, There is nothing more agonizing than realizing that they no longer have emotional control, that their actions no longer dictate your feelings or behavior. They thrive on your attention, whether it is positive or negative, love or anger, admiration or fear. When you withdraw that attention entirely, you cut off their lifeline. And without that source of power, they are left to confront the emptiness they spend their lives trying to avoid. The reason indifference is so devastating lies in the very structure of the narcissistic psyche. At their core, narcissists suffer from an unstable and fragmented sense of self. Their grandiosity and manipulation are compensatory strategies, a way to maintain a fragile identity that is constantly under threat. This is why they need to elicit reactions from others. Every time they provoke you, every time they draw you into their emotional chaos, they receive confirmation that they exist, that they still have the power to shape someone else's reality. But when you become indifferent, when their words and actions no longer elicit a response, it confronts them with a terrifying possibility that they are powerless and insignificant. And there is nothing a narcissist fears more than that. Indifference is not the same as pretending to be unaffected. It is not an act of performance or a strategy to manipulate in return. It is a state of genuine emotional disengagement, a decision to withdraw your energy from the game entirely. This requires an internal shift as much as an external one. You stop arguing. You stop explaining yourself. You stop seeking their validation or hoping for their understanding. You no longer invest any part of yourself in trying to change or influence them, and in doing so, you reclaim your emotional autonomy. This is not easy. It is human nature to want to be heard and understood. When you have been harmed, there is an instinctive desire for justice, for recognition of the pain you endured. But here is the uncomfortable truth. A narcissist will never give you that closure. They are not psychologically equipped to acknowledge the harm they cause. Expecting an apology or hoping for validation keeps you locked in their psychological grip. True freedom comes when you no longer need those things, when their inability to understand or acknowledge your pain becomes irrelevant to your own healing. What makes indifference especially powerful is that it disrupts the control dynamic entirely. Narcissists operate through emotional hooks, manipulating your need for approval, provoking reactions, and exploiting vulnerabilities. When those hooks no longer work, when you respond to their provocations with calm detachment or silence, the entire foundation of their power crumbles. They are left flailing, desperate to regain the emotional connection they once controlled. But by that point, you have already stepped out of the game. And here's something even deeper. Indifference is not just about the narcissist. It is about you. It signifies a profound shift in your identity. When you become indifferent, you are no longer defined by the relationship. You no longer measure your worth through their approval or allow their dysfunction to shape your reality. Instead, you anchor yourself in something stronger. Your own values, your own truth, your own vision of who you are and what your life is meant to be. This is not indifference born of bitterness or repression. It is the indifference of someone who has outgrown the need to prove themselves to people who cannot see them clearly. It is also worth noting that narcissists cannot tolerate indifference for long. When they realize they no longer have control over you, they will often escalate their tactics. They may attempt to provoke you with cruelty or sudden affection. They may spread lies or seek to damage your reputation. This is a last-ditch effort to pull you back into their web. But here is the key. If you remain indifferent, none of it works. You refuse to react, and that refusal is the final word. It says louder than any argument could that their power over you is finished. Indifference also protects your energy. Relationships with narcissists are exhausting because they demand a constant emotional investment, explaining yourself, defending yourself, managing their moods. When you withdraw from that dynamic, you free yourself to invest in things that matter. Your healing, your goals, your relationships with people who can love you in return. And over time, that emotional space allows you